Hi guys, this is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. I want to bring the third instalment in the Pastors Course. This is under the title C. So we've had A, B, and now we're on C. And the title of the paragraph is Seek or Keep Seeking the Leading of the Holy Spirit in Your Life. Now we've mentioned a little bit about this already, but we're going to talk some more about it. One of the most immediate and obvious features of the Christian life is that Christians ought to be guided or led by the Holy Spirit. When we read the life of Christ, we see that that Christ was specifically led of the Spirit. He was led of the Spirit right at the beginning of his ministry to go into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And he returned in the power of the Holy Spirit. And it goes without saying that all of the life of Christ, all through the life of Christ, he knew the constant awareness of the leading of the Holy Spirit. And it may surprise us to realize that nothing that Christ did in his lifetime was performed on his own account. He never had a bright idea. He never thought, oh, I know what I'll do. No, he was constantly only doing what the Father told him to do, and only performing what the Holy Spirit led him to do. Christ made a very, very important thing on one occasion. He said, I only say what the Father tells me to say. Now, what a life. He also only ever went where the Holy Spirit led him to go. What a life is that? So he only went where the Spirit led him. He only performed miracles in the empowering of the Holy Spirit. And this meant that to attribute his messianic signs to Satan was not blasphemy against Christ. It was blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit was the active agent of power in the ministry of Christ. When we move to the Acts of the Apostles, we find that all of the apostles and believers lived day by day in the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Everything was about coming to an understanding of God's will and then moving forward in God's will. Some people say to me, what is it to be in God's will? To be in God's will doesn't mean to be in a particular place or in a particular relationship or in a particular ministry. Being in God's will is being in a state in which we are willing to do his will when God makes it known. And it's up to God to make it known. It's up to the Spirit to lead. If the Spirit doesn't lead you, well, then it's the Spirit's fault. But you need to be in a position in which you're willing to do the Spirit's leading when he calls. And when we read of Philip, we find that the Spirit led him in various ways and at different times. He was led to go down to the road going down to Gaza to meet the Ethiopian. And what he found was a man already reading the scriptures and ready to hear the gospel and ready to respond immediately and to be baptized. You know, we could look at this remarkable example of being led of the Spirit. When we read of the ministry of Peter, we find that not only the Spirit leading Peter to be prepared in mind to receive Cornelius, and of course Cornelius had very specific leading of the Spirit to meet Peter. The whole of the Acts is all about men who are filled with the Holy Spirit. They are led of the Holy Spirit and they are empowered of the Holy Spirit, and this is the tenor of their life. So this is a remarkable example of God moving in people's lives to bring people together who are seeking God already. And when we read the life of the Apostle Paul, we find exactly the same thing. We find him being led of the Spirit to go here and not go there. This is perhaps the most obvious thing that pastors in general and believers in general need to understand. We need to learn to be guided by the Holy Spirit. Now, there's no point telling you how he leads me, because if I tell you how he leads me, then you need to understand that he's not going to lead you in the same way. God has only got one of me, and God has got one of you, and he wants to lead you in different ways to the way in which he leads me. You don't live where I live, and I don't live where you live. I don't have the ministry you have. So you need to now seek the leading of the Holy Spirit for your ministry. Okay, you might read of my ministry, you might read of the lives of great men. God doesn't want another one of those men anymore. He just wants you being led of the Holy Spirit and empowered in ministry and praying for God to do something in your life. Wow, this is amazing, isn't it? This is really the nitty-gritty of what being a pastor is all about. So we need to learn to be guided of the Holy Spirit. And it goes without saying that anyone that is led of the Spirit is not bound to the old covenant. It's no good throwing lots. It's no good using the old means of the old covenant to discover God's will. You need to seek the leading of the Holy Spirit. Judge Muller used to say this. He used to say that when God wanted him to do something, he would seek the leading of the Holy Spirit, and God would speak loud enough and clear enough so that eventually he would have a sure confidence in his heart, a peace in his heart about what the will of the Lord is. It wasn't about convincing himself, it was about God convincing him of what his will was. Let's have a look at Galatians chapter 5 verse 18. It says this. It says, when you are directed by the Spirit, you are not under obligation to the law of Moses. The law of Moses has got no relation to the Christian life. The law of Moses was a law. It was a life in law. Your life is a life in the Spirit. You're to be led of the Spirit. You're to be taught of the Spirit. You're to be empowered by the Spirit. You're to be filled with the Spirit. So let's think about the questions. The first question is this. Talk about the way in which in your life you have found the Holy Spirit has been leading you. Talk about that. Talk about it amongst yourselves. Tell people about how God has been leading you. You may have had remarkable instances of God leading you, or it could be that you've had none. It could be that God just leads you and you are completely unconscious of it at all. And secondly, how have you found that the Holy Spirit has led you specifically? What has he specifically led you to do? Has he led you to speak to a particular person? You see, that's a specific leading of the Holy Spirit. Thirdly, what is the Holy Spirit leading you to do in your personal life at the moment? In your personal life, what's he leading you to do? There we are. Great question. Next one is, what do you think that the Holy Spirit is leading you to do in relation to your personal ministry? I don't mean about other people. I mean that in the ministry that God has gifted you with and God has given you to do, what is he leading you to do in that ministry? And third and lastly, what is the leading of the Spirit for your church and for your pastorate? For the whole of your church, for the whole of your pastorate, what is God leading you to do? Now, these are great questions. These should occupy you for at least an hour or two of discussion. Talk to each other and encourage one another. You'll all be very different. Every one of you will be different. God leads you all differently. God gives you all a different ministry. So therefore, it's for you to figure out. So I'm looking forward to hearing back from you. Okay? And we look forward to seeing you on the next video. God bless you all. Bye for now.